Every single year, NBA fans everywhere try to use statistics to predict how players and teams are going to translate to the playoffs. Maybe they'll look at which teams have the most reliable go-to scorers. Maybe they'll look at who performed the best against top opponents throughout the season, who's got the highest net rating, or maybe even who makes the highest percentage of their threes. It's nearly impossible to predict what's actually gonna happen though. For the longest, we heard that it was impossible to win a championship without having a top 10 defense. Then in 2023, the number 15 ranked Nuggets blitzed the entire league on their way to a ring. 10 years ago, we heard that a jump shooting team would never be able to get it done, only for the Warriors to then carry out the most dominant run since the 90s Bulls. Most recently, it was common to think that the Celtics were too reliant on the three ball to make it through 4 rounds, and they went 16-3. All that's to say, there's no way of knowing which statistical signals are going to translate to postseason basketball, and it's constantly changing, not just every year, but every series and every game. What if I told you though, that there were 2 specific stats that basically predicted the entire playoffs this year? 2 stats that were staring us in the face throughout the entire season and in the early rounds. 2 stats that highlight key similarities between the Pacers and the Thunder and could end up determining this year's NBA champion. Tyrese Halliburton and Shea are about as different as 2 lead ball handlers can get. On one hand, Halliburton's looking to start almost all of his offense off of screens, forcing a specific coverage from the defense that he'll then react to, creating an advantage. More than half of his shot attempts come from 3, and although he gets downhill quite a bit, that's usually in an effort to force help to the ball before finding teammates for high percentage shots. As a result, he's always quick to get off the ball, whether that's on the 3-point line, in the paint, or even in the backcourt with kick-ahead passes. On the other hand, Shea creates most of his offense in isolation, where he'll dictate possessions through his ability to get to any spot on the floor with ease. He isn't looking for the 3. Instead, he's looking to methodically work his way inside the arc, using as much clock as it takes to find an opening. He gets downhill more than any other player in the league, but he's looking to either get to the rim, draw a foul, or pull up for a mid-range jumper with all-time accuracy. In simpler terms, Halliburton's a very capable and efficient scorer who plays more of a traditional point guard role for the Pacers, while Shea's a very capable and efficient playmaker who plays more of a volume scoring wing role for the Thunder. With all of that said though, these 2 have one huge similarity in their games, and that's the fact that they're the 2 lead ball handlers who do the best job of never turning it over. This season, Shea became the first player in NBA history to average at least 32 points with less than 2.5 turnovers. Halliburton averaged just 1.6 turnovers, which is the least ever from a player who averaged at least 9 assists. They both go about their offense in different ways, but they both do so without ever losing possession of the ball. And because both of these teams run so much of their offense through these 2 guys, this impact is reflected at the team level. OKC had the best turnover percentage in the league at 11.6%, while the Pacers ranked 3rd at 13%. That's carried right into the playoffs, with OKC again ranking 1st with the exact same percentage, and the Pacers again ranking 3rd, actually improving to 12.7%. So we're talking about 2 offenses that rarely ever turn the ball over. Well, on the defensive side of things, there's another big similarity. Of course, the personnel is completely different across the board, and OKC might just have the deepest defensive roster in NBA history. But what's the exact same is that these are the 2 teams with the most aggressive ball pressure. For OKC, they've got 4 wings who are all capable of making an all-defensive first team, and one of those guys is always going to be picking up the ball at least 40 feet away from the basket. For Indiana, it's either one of Nembhard or Nesmith who's going to be shadowing the opposing initiator for all 94 feet, and they're not afraid to send their entire lineup into the backcourt in a full court press if that's what they want to do. This pressure does a few things. For one, it messes with the pace of opposing offenses, either slowing them down or making them rush across half court. It also makes offenses expend more energy just to get into their offense, which leaves them more vulnerable to unforced errors. And then finally, there's the forced errors. More aggressive defense often results in sped up decision making, which then puts the defense in a position to create turnovers. OKC's may be the best we've ever seen in this regard. In addition to the pressure, they'll bring aggressive help, sitting defenders in the gaps to take away passing lanes, and they've got at least 3 elite defensive playmakers on the court at all times, which means they're constantly finding ways to pick up deflections or steals. As a result, their opponents averaged 17 turnovers a game, which is the most of any team by a pretty wide margin. This not only translated to the playoffs, it got amplified, jumping up to 18 forced turnovers a game, with no other team averaging even 16. The Pacers aren't quite as extreme, but it's a similar line of thinking. In the regular season, they forced 15 turnovers a game, good for 11th, and that's carried right into the playoffs, with their 14.2 forced turnovers landing them in 5th. What I'm more focused on, though, is the combination of the offense and the defense. Both of these teams are great at taking care of the ball, while also being great at making their opponent lose it. In the regular season, OKC won the turnover differential by an average of 5 points a game, which is twice as many as second place. In round 1 against the Grizzlies, that jumped up to almost 9 points, which is the most of any series. Then in round 2 against the Nuggets, they were still at almost 7, the second most of any series. Over the entire run, they've won the turnover battle by over 6 points, which is nearly 3 times as much as second place. As for the Pacers, they won the turnover differential in the regular season by an average of about 2 points a game, good for 4th. Then in the playoffs, they've maintained that differential of about 2 points, which ranks 3rd behind the Cavs, who they beat in 5 games while winning the turnover battle. And the reason this is so important is because of all 14 playoff series played this year, only 2 have been won by the team that lost the turnover differential. The Celtics turned the ball over more than the Magic, but made up that ground by simply being the considerably better offensive team, as they shot better from 2, from 3, got to the line more, just overall putting more points on the board with way better efficiency. The other series was the Nuggets against the Clippers. Denver turned it over more and shot worse, but they still found a way to get it done in 7 games. All that's to say, winning the turnover battle gives you a really good chance of winning a series, but it's still just a piece of the puzzle. I talked about how the way they pressure the ball can impact an opponent's pace. Well, for both teams, that's the foundation for good transition defense. OKC was the best in the league at limiting these opportunities, giving up less than 20 points a game in the regular season, and that's again translated to the playoffs, where they've allowed just 17 points a game despite facing 2 of the game's best transition offenses. Much like with the forced turnovers, Indiana was more middle of the pack in the regular season, ranking 12th at about 23 points allowed per game, but they've hit another gear in the playoffs, which I think is a direct result of them increasing the pressure. They've also allowed about 17 points a game, which is just a touch behind OKC and Boston for 3rd place. I'm sure you know exactly where I'm going with this, so instead of overwhelming you with more numbers, I'll keep this next part shorter. The Pacers are maybe the best transition offense we've seen since the 7 seconds or less Suns. Between their constant pace, their spacing, their ball movement, this is an offense that completely dominates in the open floor. In the playoffs, they're averaging 26 points a game in transition, while only one other team is averaging more than 22. That other team is, of course, the Thunder, who not only get a ton of points after turnovers, but in early isolation from Shea and J-Dub, or through Chet as a trailer. So much like with the turnovers, we're talking about 2 teams that have completely dominated the transition scoring differential. Here's a list of the playoff series this season with the largest transition scoring advantage. The Pacers and the Thunder account for the entire top 4, 5 of the top 6, and 6 of the top 10, as they've completely dominated this area of the game. Again, this is a big deal because in all 14 series, only 3 have been won by the team that lost the transition battle. The Nuggets again did it against the Clippers, which really highlights how wild of a series this was and how weird of a team Denver is. The Cavs lost the transition battle to Miami, but I don't think I need to explain how easy of a series that was for them in other areas. And the Knicks actually lost the transition battle to the Celtics, which played a role in them being outscored for a large chunk of the series. series, only for them to steal multiple games through their surgical fourth quarter execution. Over the entire playoffs, the Pacers have outscored their opponents by 8.5 points in transition, which is the 5th most of the 21st century. Not too far behind them, at 7th among all teams this century, is this year's Thunder, outscoring their opponents by 8 points a game in transition. These are the two stats that I've been referring to throughout this video. If you win the turnover battle, you have a very good chance of winning the series. If you win the transition battle, you have a very good chance of winning the series. And it's not a coincidence that the two teams who have completely dominated both categories have found themselves competing for a championship. Let's take a look at the differentials throughout each series. In the top right, you'll find the teams who have dominated both categories at once, like OKC in rounds 1 and 2 and Indiana in the Eastern Conference Finals. And if we just fill out the rest of their matchups, you'll notice that they've had a considerable advantage in both categories since the start of the playoffs. This really stands out if, instead of by series, we look at this graph by team. OKC is 2nd in transition and 1st in turnovers, so they're a complete outlier, and the only team better in transition has been the Pacers, who also happen to rank 3rd in turnovers. The craziest part, though, is the way this has been staring us in the face for the entire season. There were 10 teams who won both the transition scoring and turnover battle in the regular season, and of those 10, the Thunder ranked 1st by a landslide with a combined differential of +11, while the Pacers ranked 2nd at +5.3. Of course, there are a ton of nuances that go into each of these categories. It's not as simple as just scoring in transition, or taking care of the ball, or forcing turnovers. However, throughout these playoffs, it has been as simple as the two teams who do these things exceptionally well happen to be the hardest to beat. And if you wanted to boil this NBA Finals matchup down to a specific statement or main point, it'd be as simple as the two teams who have consistently won the battle of transition scoring and turnovers are now facing off. And the winner of this differential moving forward will almost certainly be crowned champion. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out the Hoop Venue podcast and my social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you think's gonna happen in this series. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.